1. My mom cut me out of her will on her birthday, completely clueless about the secret I'd been holding back. I'm Cassandra, 32, and I've spent the past 10 years building my life in New York as an art curator, far away from my mother Eleanor's need to control everything. Things between us were never easy, but nothing could have prepared me for her 65th birthday dinner at Le Bernardin. Surrounded by relatives in that elegant dining room, she tapped her glass, stared straight at me, and with a smug smile said, "I'm officially removing Cassandra from my will." The room went still. I simply smiled and replied, "That doesn't matter anymore, Mom. Before I get into what happened next, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to stand up to a toxic family member, tap like and subscribe." Our Grand Beacon Hill home in Boston looked picture perfect from the outside, but my childhood was far from it. Eleanor came from old money, the kind that's passed down for generations and shapes a person's world. She was always flawlessly put together and demanding, and nothing I ever did met her standards. My father, William, was the opposite. He built his own success in real estate and never lost his down-to-earth nature. He encouraged my creativity, much to Eleanor's annoyance. My best memories are of sitting in his study as he showed me art books and told stories behind famous paintings. When I was 10, everything collapsed. My father died suddenly of a heart attack, along with losing the only person who truly understood me. There was a sizable inheritance meant to be held in my name. Eleanor took full control of the finances, including the money meant for me. I was too young to grasp the legal side, but I knew I had lost my anchor. 2 years later, still grieving, I watched my mother marry Richard Blackwell, one of my father's business associates. Tall, polished, and calculating, he moved into our home as if it had always been his. Eleanor changed almost overnight, focusing even more on status and social image. Within a year, my half-brother James was born, and a year and a half after that, Amanda. I went from grieving daughter to outsider in my own home. Eleanor's favoritism was blatant. James and Amanda had extravagant birthday parties with ponies and entertainment. My own 13th birthday barely received a mention. When James wanted to try soccer, he got a private coach. Amanda wished for ballet lessons and got a former prima ballerina as her instructor. My love for art was brushed aside as childish fantasy. At 14, I won a school art competition. Eleanor didn't bother showing up to the ceremony. The next morning at breakfast, she said, "Creative activities are hobbies, Cassandra, not careers. You'll join the family business. Focus on economics and business." Richard wasn't cruel, but he always backed her up. "Your mother knows what's best. Blackwell children understand family legacy." Emphasis on Blackwell children. I was a Preston, not a Blackwell, a reminder that I didn't belong. By 16, I learned to keep my dreams quiet. I joined debate and AP economics to keep the peace, but spent weekends at the Museum of Fine Arts sketching. My art teacher, Mrs. Abernathy, saw my potential and encouraged me to consider art schools. For the first time, I saw a path out. College applications became my first act of rebellion. Eleanor had my life planned: Harvard Business School, then a job in the family investment firm. I applied to Harvard as told, but secretly sent applications to NYU and Columbia to study art history. When the letters arrived, I knew I had to choose my future. At dinner, I placed my NYU acceptance letter on the table and said, "I'm going to NYU. I got a partial scholarship for art history." Eleanor's face went stiff. "Harvard has a spot for you." "I never wanted Harvard. Dad would have supported this," I said, my voice shaking. Mentioning my father crossed a line. Eleanor slammed her hand on the table and snapped, "Your father isn't here. I am." That night, Richard visited my room with a compromise. They would pay for NYU if I double majored in business, meet your mother halfway, Family harmony matters. I agreed, though I didn't mention that the scholarship and a job would cover most expenses. I was already planning my escape. That summer, I worked 2 jobs and sold the expensive jewelry they gave me at 16, saving money they didn't know existed. Moving to New York felt like breathing for the first time. My tiny East Village apartment was nothing like Beacon Hill, but everything in it was mine by choice. The city was chaotic, loud, and alive. I loved it. College wasn't easy. Business classes bored me, though I excelled just to prove I could. But art history lit something inside me. A professor, M.S. Jenkins, noticed and invited me to a gallery opening, telling me I had an eye for art others overlooked. That night, I met Isabelle Laurent, a refined French-American gallery owner. I nervously shared my thoughts on an overlooked painting. She listened and introduced me to the artist, interned for me. She said later, "The pay is awful, but the experience is gold." I said yes. Isabelle became the mentor I never had. She taught me how to spot early talent and, most importantly, trust my instincts. I kept my distance from my family. Calls with Elinor were filled with judgment and reminders about the job waiting for me at Blackwell Investments. Meanwhile, James and Amanda grew into polished miniature versions of Elinor and Richard. After graduation, Isabelle offered me a position at her gallery. The pay wasn't high, but it was a real start in the art world. When I told Elinor, she sighed, "A glorified shop assistant. When you're ready for a real career, let us know." It hurt, but it fueled me. I learned everything: authentication, valuation, client relations. I lived in a 6th-floor walk-up, shared an apartment, and lived on ramen, but I was happy. Everything changed 3 years later at an estate sale in Connecticut. While everyone else eyed silverware and antiques, a dusty painting in a back hallway caught my attention. The signature was faded, but the style was unmistakable. I was almost certain it was an early piece by an artist who now sold for 6 figures. I pulled together every dollar I had, including rent and grocery money, and bought it for $8,000. Isabelle thought I'd lost it, until the painting was cleaned and authenticated. 2 months later, it sold for $75,000. My cut let me move into my own tiny apartment, and that win pushed me to take bolder bets. I started cultivating relationships with overlooked estate lawyers and small auction houses where gems hide. Word spread that I could find value in unlikely places, and wealthy clients began hiring me to build their collections. Around then, I met Daniel, an architect who restores historic buildings. We clicked at a gallery opening. He admired the moldings more than the art. "You talk about paintings the way I talk about buildings," he said on our 3rd date, like they're alive. He backed my ambitions, tagged along to out-of-the-way estate sales, and never questioned my independence. When I refused to dip into my trust fund at 30, he understood immediately. What no one knew, not Elinor, not Richard, not even Daniel at first, was that I'd been investing my commissions into undervalued artists, storing the works under an LLC in a climate-controlled facility. It was my private safety net, proof I'd become an investor on my own terms. Instead of shuffling paper for marginal gains, I was building a collection with cultural weight and real value. 6 years into my career, an invitation came for the Blackwell family trip to Martha's Vineyard. I'd skipped the last 3, but Elinor's assistant insisted this one was mandatory for the foundation's new website photos. I brought Daniel. The weekend was a clinic in passive aggression. Elinor introduced me as my daughter who works in a gallery, while crowning James a financial prodigy and Amanda the future legal star. Conversations revolved around properties, stocks, and trusts, everything I supposedly lacked. One evening on the veranda, Elinor said she was concerned about my finances and offered me a role managing the family art collection. It was another leash. I declined. I didn't mention that my private collection had just been valued north of $2 million. Let her assume I was barely getting by, then everything shifted. A letter, forwarded from my old apartment, arrived from a law firm handling the estate of my maternal grandfather, Walter Harrington. His will directed certain information to reach his grandchildren on their 32nd birthdays. I'd just turned 32. Inside was a letter and a small key. Walter's note said there were things my mother never told me. He hadn't been the financial flop Eleanor described. He'd been a discerning art collector, buying throughout the 1950s and 60s when future giants were still affordable. Fearing the collection would be pieced out for quick cash, he prepaid a 50-year lease at a secure storage facility and created a trust naming his grandchildren, directly bypassing Eleanor. "The collection is yours and your cousin's," he wrote. "Trust your eye." I barely slept. The next morning, I took the train to Philadelphia. After a long search through a partly redeveloped industrial area, I found the facility, now a specialized art storage company. They still had the records. After ID checks, a manager led me down chilled corridors and left me to use Walter's key on the inner door. Inside was a trove: paintings, sculptures, portfolios. I immediately recognized names: abstract expressionists, early pop, minimalist, seminal works from pivotal moments. I spent hours photographing and checking marks. Walter had bought when these artists were rising, paying prices a man of modest means with great taste could afford. Today, many would bring millions. I called Elaine Harrison, an art lawyer I trust. We verified the trust airtight. The collection belonged to the grandchildren, with provisions for professional management until claimed. I would notify my cousins in due course, but as the discoverer, I had first rights to manage. Experts authenticated key works. One early masterpiece alone was valued around $12 million. The whole collection topped $70 million. I wrestled with whether to tell my mother. The trust intentionally cut her out, but keeping quiet felt heavy. I finally told Daniel and showed him photos. "It only changes things if you let it," he said. He was right. I liked my life. The collection meant freedom, not reinvention. With Elaine, I insured everything, moved it to a top New York facility under a new trust I controlled, and scrubbed provenance. 6 months of quiet, grinding work followed while life appeared normal: new clients, gallery visits, dinners with Daniel's parents. Eleanor's calls continued, needling me about obligations and hinting that my career must be a struggle. Holding the secret was hard, but it was also empowering. Then came the engraved invite to Eleanor's 65th, 2 months out. The timing was perfect. By then all the legal work would be done. In the run-up, Eleanor pressed me about attending, bragged about James making partner, and dangled the family art job again. I deflected. Amanda called to warn me not to show up looking bohemian, and suggested I prepare a toast praising Mom's guidance. They were scripting me. I chose my own script instead. At Sophia's wedding, Aunt Martha, the family rebel, told me I seemed calmer, then quietly mentioned my father had worried about Eleanor's plans for the money and wanted me protected. Before I could ask more, Richard swooped in. Back in New York, I prepared. I picked a midnight blue dress with clean, architectural lines, and had Elaine condense the trust documents into a one-pager. Daniel asked if I was sure about revealing it at the party. I was. Private showdowns let Eleanor rewrite history. I needed witnesses. The night before, a text arrived. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember, you have allies." Martha, I assumed. The day of the dinner, I felt steady. Eleanor's car arrived on time. Le Bernardin was all crystal and white roses, expensive, restrained, perfectly her. Richard worked the room with 2 foundation board members. James flashed his Harvard ring. Thomas, our pediatrician cousin and the family's quieter soul, greeted me warmly. The stage was set, and for once, I was the one directing the final act. Thomas's work in community pediatrics earned Eleanor's tolerance. Being the doctor in the family still had social cachet, even if it wasn't the most lucrative path. He laughed that the job was both rewarding and exhausting, then warned, "We won't get much airtime tonight. The Eleanor show is about to start." Right on cue, Aunt Martha swept in wearing deep purple, her much younger boy friend in tow. She kissed my cheek and murmured, "Hold your ground tonight." Before I could answer, the room shifted. Eleanor had arrived. At 65, she was still striking. Tall, slim, flawless blonde, and carrying the effortless authority that money often affords. She wore a cream designer dress, a single heirloom pearl strand at her throat. Richard stepped to her side instantly, the picture of devoted husband. James and Amanda closed ranks, completing the tableau. I stayed where I was, seeing the choreography for what it was, a staged narrative of the perfect family. Eleanor made the rounds, accepting wishes with polished grace. When she reached me, her smile held while her eyes assessed. "Cassandra, you look well," she said, deliberately pausing. "I'm glad you could fit this in. Wouldn't miss it," I said, handing her a small, neatly wrapped gift, a first edition on early American art collectors. She thanked me with her well-practiced civility. Dinner unspooled with affluent precision. Discreet servers, curated wine pairings, safe conversation. I mostly watched. Richard frequently spoke over Eleanor. James echoed his stepfather's dismissive gestures when women talked. Amanda's confident remarks always ended with a glance at Eleanor for approval. After the main course, Eleanor rose. "Before dessert, thank you for celebrating with me," she began, voice steady with lifelong certainty. She spoke of legacy, the foundation, family unity. Then her tone shifted. "Responsible leadership requires hard choices. Richard and I have updated our estate plan." The room stilled. "Most things remain the same except one. After careful consideration, we've removed Cassandra from the primary inheritance." Gasps and awkward silence followed. With practiced concern, she framed it as necessity. I had distanced myself from family duty. The legacy needed stewards aligned with its values. Richard nodded. James stared at his glass. Amanda looked equal parts sympathetic and pleased. The board members looked uneasy. Eleanor added there would be a small, controlled trust for security, managed by the family office, her version of tough love. Instead of crumbling, I smiled. It rattled her. "Care to share the joke, Cassandra?" she asked, composure thinning. "Gladly," I said, standing. "It doesn't matter, because I've discovered something about our family history." I took out the folder Elaine had prepared. "Did you know Grandfather Walter was a serious art collector?" Eleanor dismissed it as dabbling. "Not quite," I said, opening the folder. 6 months ago, a letter and a key arrived timed for my 32nd birthday. They led me to a Philadelphia storage facility housing his lifetime collection. I slid a photo of a major piece across the table, and this is just one. There are over 200 works by artists now considered masters. Richard leaned in. "This looks like an early masterpiece worth about $12 million. "It is," I said, Eleanor drained of color. "If such a collection exists, it falls under my purview as the family estate. Here's the twist," I replied, handing over a summary. "He created an irrevocable trust naming his grandchildren as beneficiaries. Legally, it belongs to me and my cousins, not you." The room absorbed the next number. "The appraisal is just over $70 million. Eleanor sputtered that her father would never bypass her. "He did," I said. "Top art council verified everything. The trust is ironclad." Martha toasted me. Thomas looked stunned and impressed. I added that I'd spent 6 months securing, insuring, and authenticating the works. and that Walter saw art as cultural legacy, not just cash. I wouldn't liquidate for quick profit. Richard recovered first, insisting on a private discussion. Agreed, I said. Yet here we are. Eleanor snapped that I'd concealed this while they worried about my future, as you once revised my father's trusts after his death. I answered and edited our family history to keep control. She accused me of ambushing her. I noted she had publicly disinherited me. I'm not using inheritance to control anyone, I said. Richard pushed again. This needed attorneys. Mine already completed the work. I replied, this isn't a negotiation, it's a notice. James leaned forward. If there was 70 million, how did he and Amanda fit in? I clarified the trust covered Walter's grandchildren, me, Thomas, and our cousins Sophia and Michael, not grandchildren. Amanda bristled, and I answered the subtext. I'd spent years being treated as lesser. Let's not pretend it was equal. Eleanor hissed that I staged this for maximum humiliation, proving I couldn't be trusted with major assets. Grandfather set all this in motion 20 years ago, I said, and yes, I waited until it was secure. Prudence, given your track record with control. Thomas tried to mediate. Eleanor snapped at him, then told me I didn't understand the complexity of managing art and wealth. That's my profession, I said. You've mocked it as shopgirl work, but I'm a respected advisor. Richard shifted tactics. I needed experience with wealth and their guidance. Like the guidance that drained my father's trust, I asked. Silence. I explained the shortfall discovered at 25, inflated fees and underperforming Blackwell investments. Martha quietly confirmed my father had worried and tried to put safeguards in place until Eleanor took over after his death. Eleanor stood, declaring she wouldn't be spoken to like that, listing her sacrifices. I answered that I'd built my career without the family name, worked multiple jobs, and created my own safety net, rather than taking conditional support. The board members started edging out. Sensing reputational damage, Eleanor softened into maternal concern and suggested cooling off. I'm not upset, I said. I'm clear. I don't need your will, portraits, or foundation optics. I have my own path. Richard warned that legal challenges would be extensive, questions of provenance and tax handled, I said. Meticulous records, proper filings, secure storage under the trust. Eleanor looked suddenly older. You've planned this for months. I've been building an independent life for years, I said. Finding the collection only confirmed it. Amanda asked the practical questions. Were we splitting pieces, selling? What was her share? I explained the trust keeps the collection intact for at least 10 years, with beneficiaries deciding later, and with priority for museum donations. Walter valued legacy over liquidation. Amanda looked horrified. James was already texting a lawyer. Eleanor tried to smooth it over with brittle humor and coffee. No one bought it. Martha gave me a small nod. I stood. I'll skip dessert. Thanks for the invitation. Happy birthday. Eleanor sounded genuinely surprised. I'd always caved before. Daniel's waiting, I said to the room, apologizing for the disruption. Richard muttered they'd fight it. I paused at the door. Walter regretted how business eclipsed beauty. He hoped this collection would change that. Consider that before draining the very assets you're chasing. Outside, the summer air felt clean. I texted Daniel, it's done, coming home. For once, I left the drama behind without carrying it. The aftermath was exactly what I expected. Richard hired lawyers to attack the trust, alleging Walter lacked capacity. Their case collapsed when Walter's elderly attorney produced videotaped testimony from the time of creation, explaining why he bypassed Eleanor and how clear-minded he was when he did it. The elderly attorney testified that Walter believed his daughter valued art only as money and tended to control rather than nurture. After that, my mother tried a new tactic. She called me herself, voice stripped of its usual command, and suggested we work together to manage the collection. She claimed she had always appreciated fine art. I said the trust was already doing meaningful work. We were setting up a foundation for emerging artists in education. When it was clear I would not share control, she ended the call. 3 days later, Amanda tried guilt. She said Mom was hurt and unwell from the stress. I told her gently that I had spent 32 years chasing our mother's approval, and that her reaction to Walter's choices was not my responsibility. When Amanda accused me of abandoning the family, I asked what she had ever done for me as an equal. Her silence said enough. I pressed ahead with my cousins. We formed the Harrington Arts Trust. Thomas led school programs. Practical as ever, Sophia built a solid financial plan. We chose 30 works for an exhibition, The Hidden Collector, Walter Harrington's Visionary Eye, which opened at a major New York gallery 6 months after the dinner. I invited everyone. Martha came proudly, sharing stories of her father taking her to galleries when Eleanor was busy. To my surprise, James arrived alone and subdued. He studied the paintings instead of the price tags. I didn't know art could feel like this, he said. At home it had only ever been assets on walls. That was exactly what our grandfather wanted to change. He said he wanted to learn more. It was not an apology, but it was a start. The show drew strong press. Critics praised Walter's eye and our decision to share the work. Museums expressed interest in future donations. What began as private inheritance was becoming a public contribution. Daniel remained steady. He never pushed lifestyle changes. "This gives you freedom to do what you have always wanted," he said. He was right. The collection gave security, and I kept curating with more freedom to champion artists I believed in. We moved to a slightly larger place, but stayed in our neighborhood. The biggest change was starting a scholarship for art students from disadvantaged backgrounds. I wished that had existed when I was starting out. 3 months later, Eleanor's assistant asked for a meeting. We met for coffee. She looked older and less imposing. She admitted the exhibition impressed her, and that the foundation board had praised it. She said she and her father had clashed over her focus on financial security, and hinted that she might have been inflexible, especially about my career. For Eleanor, that was almost an apology. I met her halfway. I said we had both been stubborn, and that I could have communicated instead of withdrawing. The silence that followed was uneasy, but not hostile. Different. She invited Daniel and me to the family Christmas gathering. It was not reconciliation, but it was acknowledgement. The balance had shifted. Respect might be possible where control once ruled. I said we would consider it. Life settled into a new rhythm. The Harrington Arts Trust grew, supporting shows and education. Daniel and I got engaged and planned a small ceremony with close friends. I kept contact with Eleanor careful and limited. We would never be warm, but we could be civil. Most of all, I kept building a life that honored my father's encouragement and my grandfather's unexpected legacy. The real gift was not the money. It was the courage to value beauty where others see only assets, to define success on my own terms. In quiet moments at the museum or in my office, I imagined both of them watching with pride. They had tried in their imperfect ways to protect my independence. In the end, they succeeded by planting resilience. The greatest inheritance was freedom. I found my path one painting, one decision, one brave step at a time. If you have had to choose your path over your family's expectations, what helped you draw that line? Share your story, and if this journey speaks to you, pass it along to someone who needs to hear that it is never too late to claim your own legacy.